Hello, my beautiful people. Welcome back. I am Cecil Nick, your friendly neighborhood sound goblin. Today, we're simply going to talk simpler. Ableton Live has two sampling devices, one aptly named Sampler, and a simplified one named Simpler. Today, we're going to talk about the functions of Simpler because it's the one I use the most. So let's get down to the DAW and see what's up. Should probably plug the headphones up. All right, so this is sort of an example I cooked up using the ideas that we're going to talk about in this video. I've got two samples that we're going to work with here. One is this sort of, ambient pad sound from Splice. And then a drum break, also from Splice. So let's take a quick overview of a simpler. So I'm going to drag one in from the instruments here. There's three main modes on a simpler: classic, one shot, and slice. We're going to take a look at each one of those. But first, let's get a sample into it. And that is really easy. Let's drag this drum break audio. Boom, there it is. I'm going to switch this over to slice mode, and you can see it's already detected transients in the file and tried to break up everything into something that's playable. So where we had a drum break that plays straight through, now we could play those slices individually. I have not practiced my finger drumming in a while. That's pretty straightforward with drums. Let's drag in our other sample here. We can see its slices are not maybe quite as useful right out of the gate, but slices are very easy to adjust. We can take the pre-existing slices and drag them around. We can also just erase them by double clicking. So let's try to find some points here that work. That's good. Let's make this. And now we've got a big gap. So we could either drag this one over, or I can double click here in this little area, this sort of gray area in between where the sample display is and the top of the effect. You can double click in there and you'll get a new slice. So let's take this one. Sick. And now we could play this like any instrument. So let's just turn on a click and record something really quick. There we go. Now we have, a decent-ish. And of course, it's MIDI data, so all of this is editable as desired. Each of the modes gives us access to fade in and out, and those are like envelope settings. So a really fast or no fade in starts playing right away. Slow is kind of a gradual. Fade out is when I let go, how long does it take to go back to zero? A little bit of fade in helps smooth over any sort of like jitteriness in the sample. And that is a great thing. Then we have the transposition knob, and this is how you can tune a sample. If you need help on how to tune your samples, I have a video I'll link on that topic using Ableton, but those ideas or in any DAW. Slice is not the mode I personally use very frequently. I'm usually in one-shot or classic mode. So let's dig into one-shot mode. I'm gonna drag in this last part of our sample and I'm flipping over to one-shot, and I know I figured out that this is -5 semitones. There we go. All tuned up. So in, ooh, airplane. Hey, real quick, when was the last time you had some water? Pause the video, come back. In one shot, there's a decision you have to make right off the bat, and that's whether you want to use trigger or gate mode. Trigger will just play the sample every time there's a note. So if I pull out my keyboard here and press a note, it's gonna play even though I'm just sort of tapping the note. Let's record it in just so you can see the MIDI data representation here. So I'm just gonna like lightly tap the note. So in trigger, no matter how short or long your MIDI is, your note data, it's gonna play the entire sample that you've selected. In gate, it's only gonna play it for the duration of the note data. And then with any sort of fade in or fade out, so if I put a really long fade out, it's gonna be a little more gentle, but it's only going to play for the length of that note. For this sample, it's kind of a long, flowy ambient sound. I'm gonna leave it in trigger mode, and it's kind of quiet. I'm gonna turn the volume of this up. We have access to like a filter if we want. There's an LFO we could map to a couple different things, but our main controls here are setting the start and end of our sample, our fade in, fade out, trigger versus gate, and then volume. And then there's this velocity volume correlation. That is, if you have a velocity sensitive keyboard, how much does your pressure affect the volume? So right now I have it all the way up. So if I very lightly touch versus slamming, a bit much. The default, I honestly leave it there a lot because you get some range, but you're not gonna destroy your ears like we just did, or at least mine. I'll probably fix that in post for you. There's one more little switch that I always flip on personally, but it can affect the sound of your samples. So sometimes for especially drum samples, you might turn this off, and that is the snap button. If I zoom way in here, what snap says is you have a waveform. There's something called a zero crossing, which is when it sort of is the minimum amplitude of that waveform. That's the deep science stuff. What's practical for you, if you don't snap, you can get tiny little pops and clicks, and that can make crunchy, bad sounding audio. I'm sure you've heard stuff, little pops and clicks in videos before. You know kind of what I'm talking about. So let's just take this and flip it over to classic, which introduces one very important feature. So I'm actually gonna open up this. You can see we have this long held note. And here in one-shot mode, as soon as the audio plays, you kind of lose the rest of the note. I'm gonna let this play through once here on the MIDI data, and then I'll let it play through looking at the simpler device. So about, this far from the end of our note data, it cuts out. In classic mode, we get access to a loop feature. So right now, without changing anything, I'm gonna have the same effect on this long note. If I flip the loop right here on, I can start to try to create something to smooth over that gap. I'm also going to turn the voices down to 1. This sample is playing a chord, so if I had 2 notes playing, it's going to sound a little crunchy. So in this, it's just going to trigger 1 note at a time. Let's start adjusting the loop. And let's loop that note just so we can work freely. Let's try to get it maybe a little longer with a little less fade. There we go. Now it's right versus 1 shot. We get this like looping effect. So we can use this to extend the length of a sample that maybe isn't as long as what is necessary for the particular piece of music we're working on, or sound design, or whatever we might be doing. We also get access, instead of just like fade in, fade out, what we have is attack, decay, sustain, release. So we get a full ADSR envelope, and that can be fun. Right now when I let go, if I change my release, it's like the fade out when we were using the gate mode of 1 shot. So when I'm like pressing a note and I lift up, there's sort of a hold, which is nice. In a spot like here where I don't like perfectly immediately hit the next note. With instant release, it's going to be like, you can hear there's that little, like a gap. We don't want that. Well, unless you do. I don't want that right now. Heck yeah. There's one more important part of the Simpler to talk about, and that is the controls window. So in this default view, I have the sample window and the controls window, or I can hit this little arrow and view both at once, which if you have a large enough screen, pretty handy. Let's turn off the LFO, turn off the pitch envelope for now. We're just going to look at the filter. It's a pretty standard filter. You have frequency, resonance, and different filter types. Nothing too fancy. You do get a little bit of a drive module, which is nice if you need to add a little character. Filter. We love a filter. There's an LFO, which is not the most robust LFO to have ever existed, but this is the simpler device. So we get access to a couple standard wave shapes you can do based on hertz or note divisions. Let's do 16th notes for maybe 8th notes for max effect. And then you can map it to 4 main destinations: the output volume, the output pan, the pitch, and then to the filter frequency. So let's start there. If you're in headphones, you'll get that full effect. On this sample, that pitch modulation, not so great. We would have to be a little more subtle. One important switch here is this LFO retrigger. And of course, if you're following along, you don't know, anything in Live has this info view in the bottom left. So if you hover over any parameter, it will tell you what that parameter does if you're using a stock device. This is the LFO retrigger. Toggle this on to reset the LFO to its starting point on every new MIDI note. If you're using synchronized LFO, this doesn't really matter, but if you're trying to do something a little more funky, you might want it to not reset every time. Let's make something exaggerated to sort of test that out. Right? If it's retriggers off and you have something that's kind of off beat, you can create these little grooves. So let's get something kind of funky going on. Digging that. It's like very subtle. There's like tiny little variations that kind of make it a little bit more interesting over time. The last thing you can mess with, let's turn the LFO off for a second, is the pitch envelope. This is great for anything that's like a pluck, drum sounds. A lot of the time you might use this. Basically what it lets you do is, I'm going to change this amount to 12. Get it? It starts off at a higher pitch and it kind of comes down. And you can adjust the envelope of that. So I don't think it's great on this particular sound. Maybe just like a hint of it though. Let's add the LFO back in. So that is Ableton's simpler device, hopefully explained simply. If there's any questions, let me know in the comments while you're down there. Do all the YouTube stuff, like, etc. If there's an idea you would like me to cover, you can find me most places on the internet. Links down below or in my profile. I'm Cecil Nick. This is Mono Audio. Until next time, stay safe, stay warm. And seriously, drink some water, okay? Please.